We're going live. And we're live. This is Failed State Update, and I am Joseph L. Flatley, and it's about 90 degrees in my apartment here in Pittsburgh, which is not cool, literally. I'm here with my co-host, JG. How you doing, JG, Michael?
Pretty good. And I'm happy with the guests we were able to score today.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of which, tonight we have two guests from The Nose. That's KNOWS, a data and document-driven investigative journalism outlet that has been doing some real interesting work surrounding foreign influence and shadow money in politics. And it's going to be one hell of a show. So Emily and Rocco, welcome. Why don't you introduce yourselves?
Go ahead, Rocco.
Well, thanks guys for having us. And my name is Rocco. I'm from Florida. I moved to New York in 2005. Somehow wound up editor-in-chief of VICE, and have been on a ride ever since. That's put me right here on your show, and with Emily.
And I'm Emily Molli. I'm from Chicago area originally. I've been an independent journalist pretty much my entire career, and just recently founded The Nose with Rocco. I'm special projects editor, which right now all of our projects are special. And it's kind of great because I'm finally getting to do sort of all that I've wanted to do, and couldn't have asked for a better team.
So how did the site come together?
That's a pretty good question. It was kind of out of necessity more than anything. Rocco and I had been working together at another company, Scanner, before this. And on January 6th, some weird stuff went down, and we got separated from that company. So, not wanting to let our hard work go to waste, and also with all of the other things, all of the other projects that we really wanted to do, we figured, well, we might as well just start a new company and just go for it. No masters, no nothing, no funding, but we'll figure that out along the way.
Oh, isn't that the way?
And thankfully, we've been very, very fortunate with our individual projects and being able to put that into what we're doing going forward. So The Nose is kind of the child of necessity and of being dealt a very weird hand and trying to make the most of it.
Did the downfall of Scanner have anything to do with foreign influence and shadowy money and politics in the media?
Well, we have to see about that. I've been on quite a longer tidal wave, I guess you could say, and surfing and enjoying every second of it. I think I got a firsthand look at whether it's foreign influence, domestic influence, or just bought influence of how what I call the media advertising industrial complex works. And I think that a lot of influence is, as they say, perception is reality, but is it really if people become self-aware of things like botnets, things like using digital advertising fraud. So you can imagine very easily a script, and you can very easily go on Google and buy YouTube views.
And the whole sentiment analysis that you've been.
People have heard about Cambridge Analytica, all these things. And I saw how that was being used to sell advertising against salacious clicks. Whether it be Vice or BuzzFeed, a lot of these places that you watched go from $5 billion or, whatever, couple $1 billion valuations into cratering into SPAC, special purpose acquisition stock sales. To me, The Nose is the inevitable outcome of a lot of stories I've been working on for years. A lot of stories that no one would run, or got me in a lot of trouble with the media industry itself for various reasons, but none of them to their favor, I don't think. And we now have models, now that people are familiar with terms like catch and kill and stuff like what happened with Harvey Weinstein and Black Cube and these things that are now lore, if you will, and where 6 years ago, nobody would have believed you. We have models for all this, and we want to kind of turn them on their head. And that's what we've tried to do with our first couple pieces here that You know, first big piece is about the inauguration and a unaired documentary that was produced by associates of Mark Burnett and Elizabeth Koch of the Koch family that Amazon pursued as a potential reality series about the presidential inaugural committee, essentially the people that do the business of inaugurating the president. And what's interesting about that, and Amazon backed out at the last minute, but it was still filmed for a reason, never mentioned to the public or really in any way looked at as far as we know, and any investigations by the government or the FTC or any of these things that are ongoing, which is important to note because MGM and Amazon just had Amazon bought MGM Studios in a $8.5 billion deal. And Mark Burnett is a global television chair of worldwide. Am I getting that right? I don't know.
It's global.
He runs TV for MGM. And it,
worldwide or whatever. Yeah.
It was under FTC review. But you take a step back and you're like, why are they filming this? Why didn't it air? What are all of these people that have been handed indictments or are under investigation or are in very, very deep water legal proceedings, like Tom Barrack, who is the chairman of the Presidential Inaugural Committee, who ultimately signed off on a lot of these things, including the documentary and the 17 hours of audio we've recovered from that. And obviously, that's a big project. And other outlets, I think there was one mention in the New York Times, a historian years ago, that
they just mentioned a documentary, right?
One mention of the documentary. Yeah. And that's one piece of a story that will wind up being the first publication was 10,000 words, but we very strategically did that to not get sued. We have not had one refutation. It's been 2 weeks now. We put our prologue of the podcast, which kind of shows our hand of what we have. And that's the kind of very thorough ownership of stories we want to continue to do, whether it be about Dominion voting and, gang stalking, quite frankly, including people that have gang stalked us and how that relates to January 6th. Stuff that sounds like Star Trek stuff, but or science fiction in some deranged alternate reality. But this is our reality. And
that's the fun part of like what we're doing is we're pretty much going to show everybody through data, documents, and firsthand
just calling people on the phone.
I feel like that's a lost art these days, calling people on the phone. And a lot of people just don't, when you have them, they mostly don't want to give comment, but we have our ways of figuring things out.
It's also in participating in what I would call good faith but adversarial journalism. And what that basically means is like, you let your source set the parameters, but if they're in bad faith and they lie to you, most reporters would freak out or get upset with them because they got lied to. And I'm like, why don't you lean into it and be like, hey, let's go out, let's go talk some more and find out what other lies they want to tell you. And then later you're like, hey man, you lied to me about all this stuff and can't get upset because I didn't. We're just having a conversation here. And I have all these documents, and here they are. And typically, they do stuff like give you Mark Burnett's personal cell phone number, and give up 5 people that you didn't have proof on. And like, I don't know if that's considered. And I'm going to shut up for a second. I'd like Emily to tell me, what she thinks about what I just said about getting sources like that, and how she reports differently, and how that's always. Well, to bring a toolbox that everyone has their own tool set. And then I want to hear what you guys think about what I just said.
So to bring it back to the nose, like a big reason of why I wanted to continue working with Rocco is because he has some pretty unconventional reporting methods, I'll say, but they're extremely effective. And I get to put my own personal spin, personal brand on that, however I want. But again, like this is the kind of stuff that I feel like a lot of places just don't foster these kinds of like investigative tactics of just like getting to the truth. So many other outlets will just report a police statement just as is without digging much deeper than that, or just take somebody's statement as truth or fact, or, you know, a corporation's press release as truth or fact, and not really dig much deeper than that. So it's, you know, it does make some people uncomfortable, including reporters, if you ask them to do some of these things. But at the end of the day, if you're doing it in an ethical way, a little bit of uncomfortability can go a long way.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's muckraking. It's what Upton Sinclair or H.L. Mencken or lots of journalists around a time, I think that has a lot of parallels till now, were really looking at the grime of society, like the corruption, all of these things that we actually live in a time when that data is more available than ever, which it also, the flip side of that is that disinformation and what is the other term that it's
malinformation,
which I think
it's my new favorite. I think.
Two different distinctions there, that it's easier to propagate and people want a simple narrative. And it's like, well, did the world get more simple or did it get more complex?
And a lot more complicated.
People love true crime, but only when there's like a culprit to be caught.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. True crime. So did you guys even bother shopping this story around, or was this always going to be, you know, your own?
It was always going to be our own.
It was always going to be our own. We did want to do a different, like, you know, the way that this progressed is we managed to source the audio first and foremost, and we knew we wanted to do something with it. This is Betsy.
Betsy, glad you got Betsy back.
Oh my God! Hey, not the water. Come on. Sorry. What was the question again? Sorry. So distracting.
Well, I'm just wondering, like, you know,
shop it around.
Yeah,
right,
new media.
Yes. Okay.
Organization is a large undertaking.
So we did want to do it eventually, like in a different way we were going to do it, but the way that we did it with this was so much better. And we didn't shop it around because we knew if we did try to do it through somebody else, they would.
We approached through intermediary one potential co-producer for the podcast, which to me, I always knew that if I could do a long form article, even about what I originally had gotten my hands on, which was the audio that is on the podcast. And if you've listened, and I encourage everybody to listen at the nose, THETNOWS.net, and it's all there. And I'll read you the whole 10,000 word article too.
You've got no excuse not to listen to it.
When I first heard it, I'm like, Elliot Brody, this sounds like he's come out of a Dick Tracy comic strip. Oh, this is Elliot Brody. And I'm like, this is what it sounds like. Not when doves cry, but you know, this is what it sounds like when you peek behind the curtain into events that I've been on the periphery of, that I've always been interested in, and not in like a Tom Wolfe Bonfire of the Vanities frame, more like, how does this work? And again, Upton Sinclair being a reference of like, I don't want, you know, a summary. I want to understand, why are these people here? What are they doing? And how does this work? And why are they talking about things like the greatest passage of partisan power of all time?
Right.
I don't want to hear about that in a democracy. It's like, okay, talking about an oxymoron. And once I start hearing phrases like that, and I'm like, wait a second, you want me to help you, this sound recordist that I met on a documentary I was doing about Val Brookschmidt that will be out probably next year. We'll see what happens. But the Deutsche Bank whistleblower and Sony North Korea hack associated individual who also passed recently, and you know, untimely, and I don't think it's mysterious necessarily, but there's more to be
there's a lot
looked
to
into there.
Yeah.
And it saddened me a lot to hear that. We spent a lot of time together, and he was troubled by lots of things that any normal person would be. And I had worked with a great sound recordist on it who was very private, confidential, like someone that I trusted doing all
real
this.
Professional, yeah.
And I got to know him, and he's like, "Hey man, I'm hoping you could help me get paid with this contract that somebody owes me, or maybe you'll be interested. Or he tells me what it is, and I'm like, well, you have like more than a dozen hours of Trump's inauguration for a reality, far-fetched. And then, but I believe him because I just watched him do this. So I got him and listened, and it blew my mind. And so we worked out an arrangement that took a while. But once you have an Excalibur like that, the turd blossom opens to unfathomable degrees, where you're swimming in documents. Nobody will touch it. Amazon won't comment to you after 3.5 hours in the phone. It feels like the Twilight Zone.
No, exactly. I mean, the sheer amount of no comments or just even refusal to get back in touch after making the first contact, where you can, like Rocco even called somebody up, he picks up, confirms that he was on the project, and then he would, call back later or whatever. And when Rocco called back again, just didn't want to have anything to do.
I texted with him, I think it was something like close to 40 people who did not respond to me.
Yeah.
And I've been doing this a long time now. I did go to journalism school. It was in Florida. I don't know if that counts, but
I'm sure it counts.
University of Florida, of course, is a great journalism school. That doesn't make me special at all. But I'm saying I've been on the side of somebody having to edit 25, 30 pieces a day for a site like Vice. That was very high volume, sort of the peak of new media. And really all that meant was we're going to put it on Facebook and botnet stuff, arbitrage it.
Right.
And that was successful for a while. And I had a wonderful time. I don't regret a second of it. But I did try to leave the industry. And when I get my hands on stuff like this or hear inklings of it, that makes me want to come back, because I feel like we can kind of slam dunk all these parties involved, which are people like, and I'm talking about the presidential inauguration and the documentary that was filmed eventually, that I got the audio from this guy on a shoot that we're doing with a Deutsche Bank whistleblower. I mean, not many times have I gotten in situations like that in my life.
No, and I'd say like, sometimes things just drop into your lap. Other times you just know where to sniff it out. I would say this is a good combination of the two. It dropped into your lap to a certain extent, and then you knew exactly where to go to sniff it out after that.
It's pretty boring if you listen to the raw audio, but if you listen to Elliot Brody and Larry Meisel and next to Jeff Sessions,
once you clean it up and you can actually hear what they're talking about in those sort of side conversations when they don't know they're being recorded.
I'm sorry, I can't talk about this. That's why we made the podcast and wrote it, because I get too excited. But when you hear these seconds that the whole world turns on, that was like, I knew I had to create some packages around this. And we're working on several other sort of suites of stories that are both related and unrelated. But the same players keep coming.
The same players, yes. And so again, like, I don't know if that's just stuff dropping into our lap, but a lot of times, at least in my career, it's been like that.
So who are the players?
So, we'll go down the line. We kind of have different podcast episodes for different people. We started with Tom Barrack.
He hasn't aired yet, just to be clear. Only the prologue.
Oh, yes. Only the prologue has aired.
It will next week.
We just released.
This is not to interrupt you, but this is the same Tom Barrack that was accused of basically influence peddling as a foreign agent for the UAE, right?
He is currently under indictment for acting as an unregistered foreign agent, or FARA, for the United Arab Emirates. And FARA has been something we've been kind of fixated on for over a year and a half. Even when we were still with Scanner, we were working on foreign influence stories, because it's just amazing how prevalent foreign influence is in the US and, at the top levels of the administration. And, it's pretty much every administration, if you really look at it. We got to start digging into, Elliot Brody he kind of dropped into our lap, and Chinese influence as well. And
it kind of filled up our whole lap.
Yeah, it did. Because and he's also going to be an individual we're going to be reporting on more for the nose. But we started reporting on Elliot Brody through Scanner, and I'll come back to that. Remind me. But other than Broidy and Tom Barrack, we're going to be looking at Mark Burnett and these individuals who are involved with a production company called Tiny Horse, and as well as other associates of Mark Burnett.
And foreign influence, Russian. Let's call it Russia's favorite American banker,
Robert Forsman. Yes,
who has a relationship with Mark Burnett.
Yes,
that resulted in. We're not going to say influence peddling. We're just going to talk about them.
Even through people like Steve Bannon getting access to high levels of the administration.
These people aren't on the tapes, to be clear.
Sure,
but they're in the periphery of.
And that's why
foreign influence.
That's why the parallel reporting that we're doing is so important, because we have a ton of documents as well.
But back to the tapes, though. We do have some people like Donald J. Trump Jr. We have him in passing talking about. My college bro, he quit his job and now he lugs my bags and he runs my social media for free. He
does more than that, but he doesn't say that on. Yeah. And we dig into that a bit more.
I don't give it all away, but it's an odd thing to say to a camera crew.
But when you know the backstory, it makes
future
sense.
First family member.
Yes.
What do you want to talk and memorialize forever? And so in some ways, it's no wonder these tapes didn't come out, but we also have, I mentioned Larry Meisel. He's a billionaire real estate developer like Tom Barrack in a different way, but it's all money. And you got to think of these things on a global scale. And he's talking to Broidy about something that we'll just say there's a list involved. There's someone that's very highly connected to the Israeli government involved out of LA. And we don't want to get into much more than that.
But speaking of Israel, we also have Rudy Giuliani on tape. We have Sheldon Adelson on tape. We have, we have some more obscure people that aren't super well known.
I think we even have John Voight a little bit on tape.
We do have Stephanie Winston Wolkoff, because she was kind of one of the figures who was followed around during this.
And if you read the article, and we haven't really gotten into this in the podcast series yet, it's pretty clear, and we were unable to get comment from her, but it's pretty clear that she was dragged through the mud at the very least, and a lot worse at the very most, especially by the way it was reported by the New York Times and other outlets about a missing, it's about 26
million. Not missing 26 million.
Unaccounted for.
There's more millions that are unaccounted for, but the New York Times sort of misreported at first that she had taken $26 million, but it was like such a butchered story, and it was clearly trying to cover who actually was.
We cover it in the article. Yeah. It's almost
and the next
so Byzantine. Well. Yeah, and we'll be talking more about it. But it's part of a telemedia covering it. But you take a step back and you realize, these same people control the media. Barrack was, I believe, chair of the Weinstein Company post Disney buyout. He tried to bail out the Weinstein Company. He was the chairman of Miramax.
Right.
I got that wrong. Sorry.
Yes.
And he's deeply involved in the entertainment industry, is my point. And obviously, around Weinstein's companies, that becomes into play a lot later. We have a lot more reporting to do there, but we found some stuff the other day where we were like, ugh. And you notice that you've got, it's the people on the production themselves, they're power brokers in the real way, like John Renaga, who's a founder of Tiny Horse, the production company and marketing company, since acquired in a succession of deals in 2020 and 2021 that,
for millions of dollars.
Hundreds of millions really in terms of revenue by the companies that acquired them. He was a founding partner, and before that, he worked with the Peruvian, not the Peruvian government, but certain politicians.
And Tony Blair.
But he was Tony Blair's comms guy,
yes.
But the magic man inside of his office, and then out when after he was prime minister, he worked for his foundation in Rwanda, which Tony Blair had established. Essentially as a unofficial arm of the government. If you read into it, it's quite fascinating. I won't go into all that here, but you can imagine the type of turnkey foreign influence
Yes.
that's at these people's fingertips.
Yeah. Without getting too into the weeds, I'll just say, the big themes we keep coming back to kind of have to do with the media industry, foreign influence, and a lot of capital.
Yeah.
And sovereign wealth
capital.
funds, and foreign investment, etc. So I know it doesn't sound like the sexiest stuff, but when you actually really think about how much these kinds of things have an impact on our culture as well as our politics, and you kind of realize all of these other ways.
I beg to differ. If on the surface it doesn't sound it, but if you read an Ian Fleming novel, James Bond novel, or you read a spy novel, and you watch the movies closely, you realize that these are the dudes. These are the guys. And it's pretty exhilarating to email them and say, are you friends with this person that we have documents on you emailing with, and get no response?
And honestly, I used to cover a lot of riots and civil unrest, and there's no way to avoid getting adrenaline rushes from that. But I will say one of the best adrenaline rushes I've ever had was getting a legal threat from Elliot Broidy's lawyers. And
that's Steptoe and Johnson.
Which pretty large
white shoe, as they say, a law firm. Eric Prince's law firm.
So what we're trying to do is kind of try to share and explain the importance and uncover things that a lot of people just don't understand are going on, or other people try to sweep under the rug, other news companies even try to sweep under the rug, media companies, etc. So again, we're just trying to I know everybody really likes to jump on more hot button issues, and a lot of things that we see on social media are mostly distractions, and that is a really, really effective way of getting people not to care about things like this, or not even pay attention to things like this, or just not think that they can understand things like this, where what we're trying to do is help break it down a little easier and show people the significance.
Sure. And I mean, it's quite a story, just having, the narrative backdrop of being behind the scenes at the inauguration, and this really bizarre scheme of turning it into a reality show. And of course, Trump wanted to turn it into a reality show. I mean, that in itself is inherently problematic, but it also, the impression I'm getting from your prologue and from your coverage so far is that it really was a open air market for influence peddling, which is super, super interesting.
Yeah. And again, I'm sure this happens in every administration.
It's unclear to the extent. It's a
to
great
the extent
question.
I'm sure people try,
exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
It's an uncharted terrain, perhaps. And you got to think about how the people around Trump, and that's the great part about this, to me at least, the series, is Trump becomes, either there's two things going on here. He's in on it, or he's being taken advantage of. And those are two things that everyone de facto has to care about. And then we don't have to talk about him until the end.
Yes.
Because it's like when they're going to Tom Barrack to get approval on Paul Manafort as a campaign manager, essentially, there's something funny going on here. Okay, it doesn't pass the smell test, whatever you want to say. And then when you have the tapes and you have the documents, and you're like, whoa. That lawyer who's brokering the deal for the broadcast rights to the pick then joins the administration 2 weeks later as a deputy White House. Oh, that's rich.
And you see a lot of that. Yeah.
These are the things you see that you're really, again, you're not supposed to see them, but this is so sloppy that it's quite frankly just really embarrassing.
And it's no wonder that the sound recordist on the project was told when he tried to retrieve more of his files from from some of the others involved in the production, that he told us the specific words he was told is, "This project will never see the light of day."
Your project, or
no,
the doc,
or the whole doc. Yeah.
Race to 58 was the name of the working title of this, and it was always a working title because they never actually, despite this kind of pitch with Amazon, where it was very weird. Literally, a guy named CJU, Mark Burnett's, and this guy CJU was at UCLA going to college. According to his LinkedIn, he worked for Mark Burnett out of his personal office for Mark Burnett Productions. So this is fairly early on, through the days of The Apprentice and Survivor. And he was off and on with the company, as that's typical of people that find a niche in Hollywood and stick with it. He's done good work. I've talked to several people that know him. I've done business myself out in Hollywood, and it's a shit house mess out there. And so everyone knows one another. And so I don't think I have any, he never talked to me. In other words, it seems to me he did his job very well throughout the entire thing. But what was his job? If he had worked for Mark Burnett, another guy who worked for Mark Burnett and actually co-produced the pilot for The Apprentice for NBC. That's how far you gotta go back. Who was at Amazon at a very high level. A week before they would need to start filming what they're pitching as a reality series, limited reality series. This guy emails the Tiny Horse team, the people who actually produced this. I got great news. I talked to my friend Sadhu, who's at Amazon, and he says they might be in. This is like a midnight email. They're already all working in DC on location. He'll pay 600. He said, no, the Amazon will probably pay 600,000. He'll allow Trump and the First Family editorial oversight, but not final cut, which, I mean, okay. That says it all. That they need guaranteed access to the president and people close to the presidential inaugural committee, on which Burnett also served on the presidential inaugural committee.
He was one of the special advisors alongside Stephanie Winston Wolkoff. Yes.
And it's very nebulous, amorphous thing, this PIC, they call it, the presidential
right.
inaugural
And so
committee.
as CJ is pitching this project, he's also working for the PIC. And it's actually pretty interesting. We did get our hands on a couple different lists associated with the PIC. We've got thousands of documents. Mm-hmm. And some of the names that and again, I don't want to give too much away because we're going to be doing a lot of reporting on this.
Yeah.
But I do think if people are interested in the media industry and how that plays into influence, politics, and all of these things, this is a podcast they will really, really find fascinating. And even if they're not into that stuff, I've had a lot of people tell me who don't really keep up with politics. Mm-hmm. Wow, I was surprised I was able to understand that. And I found it pretty interesting.
We wanted to make it like a true crime whodunit podcast. I don't know if people have picked up on it, but one of the many inspirations of The Nose, which is very much a collective project, is really in V for Vendetta, The Nose was the name of the intelligence agency,
Yeah.
And that has a lot of ties with various groups that don't have names. And we thought it was pretty funny. And then also the shadow knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men. And it's the old timey radio shows, like a serial about, Orson Welles would do it. Alec Baldwin did the movie where I think he shot a lot of people in the movie. I don't think he managed to shoot anybody in IRL. But it was, and I liked it's a good movie actually. Emily drew this character where I kept talking like a maniac about this old Sudafed commercial where everyone's a giant nose and they're on the subway walking. Finally found it on YouTube. And then I said, but put a trench coat on it.
Yeah.
And there's this idea, I just think of can we look into the things that have made things so corrupt that the media dare not report on them? And it's not an indictment on the media. I've been there. They want to. Some of them don't.
There are some reporters who still have the chops. Just they just have the masters.
Stay away from it. It's a pain in their ass. Because they have to deal with their bosses. And, well, you got to take this mention of Chrysler out because we got a big branded content. They fuck off. I don't want to hear from your business side. So is there a different way to do that? And we're playing with ideas at the end of this limited podcast series, which we call 7 Days in January. And that is going to have multiple reporting pieces that spring out of it. Do we do something like NFT, which again, turning it on its head, all of the raw audio? And do we try to figure out, maybe NFT is not the right way to do it, but
We just want
you
it to
know,
be immutable, accessible by the public, and again, like, want it to be a living document almost.
well,
too.
and it's like also journalism has to be done in the public's interest in America, and it's the only place that really we have this relationship with the freedom of speech and the freedom to report all the way up to and potentially past, and I mean more so the Pentagon Papers and less so WikiLeaks, but I'm talking about national security and get away with it and be celebrated and win awards for it. If we don't do that and preserve that, the rest of the world is dead on it. It's never coming back. I don't know. I mean, I guess there's people out there like, I'm not going to name their names, but I think everybody knows the usual suspects of corporate intelligence and data shitlords that think they know better.
I'm glad you mentioned corporate intelligence there,
Okay.
because I had a question about. So when we talk about this issue of foreign influence, and I think it's a very real issue, a lot of hay was made over Fusion GPS, which that's where we get the Still dossier story from. And what you're doing feels a little bit different from that in that you're working completely independently. Whereas I think Fusion GPS it's a corporate investigative firm. It kind of is mercenary. It was initially being funded by Paul Singer and Washington Free Beacon. Do you think there's issues with how we look at the issue of foreign influence and who's pushing what information? I
mean, there's so many issues with it, whether it be through, the people having problematic relationships with billionaires owning the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal that used to be an actual competition for the news together. And in some instances, you might wonder if they're in coordination with the news together. And it's tough to say.
Well, I mean, I think it has been that way for a while.
Sure, but there's substrata of that now.
Sure.
So if I'm a foreign influencer who can work with a podcaster who's commissioned by a contractor for a private intelligence firm, I'm thinking of a pretty specific example without saying names because it gives away too much. And I start slinging election conspiracies about Dominion voting on how, it's security officer is Antifa, and I have a call about it, and that makes it and worms its little fingers into the mainstream press.
Well,
I'm just saying, you take a step back, and the real story behind that is that was purposeful. And then there's what would be called patsies or fences in the sort of criminal syndicate, but even in corporate intelligence firm, because a lot of what the corporate intelligence firms do is they try to find the problems that either corporations or individuals, usually powerful, wealthy individuals, have, and diffuse them before they affect their bottom line.
Sure.
Now, if we can apply that model to the public's interest, that wakes me up a little bit. Like, it's a smelling salt to me. Is it for other people? You can only really put it out there. But I've had decent success in the past with knowing what people want at certain times. Would have people wanted this 5 years ago? 6? No, they wanted what they got. What we got, I guess.
And Rocco has had some pretty interesting experience. I don't know if he wants to talk about or save it for a book. Corporate intelligence, and I guess we won't get too much into it. But I feel like he is very uniquely positioned in.
It's what got me out of reporting. I'll just say that,
right.
Like back into reporting, because I was ready to kind of just write screenplays or whatever, and maybe write some books. I had a long non-compete with Vice where I couldn't work for about 15 different outlets. They really,
like the big ones too.
In other words, I was like, I didn't sign that to begin with, so they presented me and I had not signed nothing, and I was like, "This is what you want." Oh, I guess I know a little too much, and I think certain events happened. And I'm not saying Trump got elected or anything, but the foreign influence, that is still stuff that's being uncovered, that Trump's wrapped around, but he becomes less and less interesting by the day.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of part of the approach that we've been taking to this is, I don't care, like you can be anti-Trump, I don't really care, like, but there's so much more underneath that I feel is so important, and we've beat the Trump thing to death over.
It all got blamed on Russia too, in ways that
has obfuscated certain information and like
Russia's
thrown a
one
bone
hell of
in a
flower.
different direction for people to follow, while all of these other people over here go pretty much wreak havoc in ways that are still only really coming to light.
Well, maybe you should talk about Guo and his and how just who he is with Bannon and what you saw leading up to the 6th.
Okay, that's that's a good
example
transition.
that's outside of this.
Are you talking about Guo Wengwei, or the guy that had the yacht with Bannon, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So that's
Okay.
really all
I'd love to know more about him. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Okay. I love like this. Okay. I've been looking into this for a while, like, even, around, we started reporting on Guo for Scanner, and I had been looking into him a while before we even started reporting on him. I had been covering the Hong Kong protests and the pro-democracy movement, and, these different dissident sects within the United States and other countries. And Guo is sort of this ringleader, so to speak, figure of where he very much portrays himself as a dissident. And, he used to work for the MSS, and, I'll say like a lot of this stuff, allegedly, Guo used to pretty much run blackmail. And when he came to the US during the Trump administration, well, let's see how much I want to reveal, because we are going to report a lot of this out. But
it's more about that Guo created alternatives to Twitter. Getter,
yes.
Guo made that, right? And we've talked to the developer. Guo tasked him with developing that to use it as a way to scrape Twitter's API.
And then he was also talking to another developer, his words, to create blackmail.
There's a whole alternative universe, like Hunter Biden's laptop porn, crack porn, whatever you want to call it, was put out through GTV, which was going to be an alternative, and is an alternative Chinese language to TikTok. So, and Getter started as a Chinese language alternative to Twitter.
Right.
And we were told, allegedly, that Trump's grand plan was to get like TikTok banned and replace it with Guo's version, and get Twitter banned and replace it with Getter, which there's a lot of truth there. It's more complex than that.
And we'll get into a lot of these things, but to bring it back to essentially what we're looking into, and
create something called the New Federation of China.
Yes, and
another scam. Basically.
So when Bannon left the administration, he went and he started working with Guo. They created this new federation, federal state of China. And, there's some other things that have to do with technology, aside from the Getter stuff, aside from the GTV stuff, that is very important to look at, and how it interfaces with government funding and all of these other things. But essentially, he used to be part of the CCP, and there are factions within the CCP. So like, when
just
one,
like the US,
just like the US, like,
well, not just like the US,
well, not just
lots of factions.
Essentially, his faction got booted out of power, and he left to go to the United States, sort of set up shop here, started marketing himself as a dissident, and was very, very effective in doing that. And he was hitting all the right notes of what he needed to do. I think Bannon smelled an opportunity, but he also smelled like, And so there's been a lot of, scams that Guo has been pulling, and, finally now, he's been going to court for some of these.
Actually, there's a filing today I haven't even looked at today under his real name, Ho.
Ho, I can't pronounce it right. Quack, whatever. Anyway, he's got a lot of different aliases. Yeah.
Miles Quack.
So he also recently filed for bankruptcy. And this is after he had raised hundreds of millions of dollars for his sort of crypto scams too. So he's been violating all kinds of regulations, laws, etc.
You read the court filings of this guy, like people like Sam Nunberg have sued him. Like Roger Stone and him had some like words.
Oh,
like,
and then
how many other people? Oh, Michael J. Waller, and he got scammed for like $1 million. J. Michael Waller, sorry, and he got scammed for $1 million from Glow, and he won it back in court while he's like hiring corporate intelligence. He's like,
well, no, Waller's company has to pay Glow the million. That was
he has to pay him back the million.
So again, like Glow is very good at exploiting the justice system and American. Like he's a scammer, man. It's amazing.
I mean, he is the ultimate. He's like a James Bond villain if he was played by, oh man, what's the guy? Never mind. I'll have to think about it. But he's a literal life James Bond villain.
Good.
I was gonna say, it sounds like a lot of what went on during the Trump presidency, especially with people like Bannon, it was just running a multitude of different scams and just operations to get money. Jared Kushner cutting deals with the UAE,
build the wall thing.
There was the whole thing with Bannon trying to do the privately funded wall, which that was all a giant scam, just scamming his own followers.
No, I think scammers have a way of finding each other like that.
Do you think that's what sort of brings it all together? Is sort of like
there's some profoundly greedy people out there.
Was that what the Trump presidency was about in a lot of ways, though? Was, let's make as much money as possible through scams and taking money from whatever influence wants us to push their agenda?
Well, I think you have to look at it as in terms of time too. They had 4 years to do a lot of these things, and right off the bat, there were people trying to move money, foreign money, in different ways.
It wasn't just like when you say Trump and Trump's people. It's kind of what you referenced earlier, where it was a free for all or a meat market of potential. And in fact, there were different levels, which we haven't gotten into in the reporting, but deep in the documents, you can see references to it. But even Tom Barrack, at one point on the recordings, he's addressing the crowd at one of the most exclusive nights, no press is allowed, called
the Chairman's
Global Dinner. It's his global dinner, and he's talking about maybe we already did post some of the audio.
A little bit.
The diamonds and sapphires and rubies, which outside the context, you don't know what that means. But what it means is different levels of donations and contributions that were different levels of essentially influence on some of the way he's talking about it and the way I interpret it. I don't know about you, but he says you put them all in a necklace, the diamonds and sapphires and rubies and pearls. So the people that are all sitting here who donated millions of dollars, and you have a necklace that essentially is like a new world order. As close as that I'm ever going to be able. I didn't say that, but you saw the necklaces and diamonds and rubies and pearls, and I feel like Alex Jones is going to based and be like, and squeal like a pig or something.
It's sort of like it's like determining governance based on the highest bidder is what it seems like we got.
But see, and their point of view, I believe, and this is where people need to break their brains open a bit or expand them. It's like left and right. No, money makes the world go around, and it outside the scope of the United States in particular. So if our people are being influenced by this, it's no good.
And if it's not money, it's fear.
And if their excuse is, well, the rest of the world does it like this, it's like, well, that's where we lose our edge, isn't it now? In terms of being a place where the free press can happen. The other stuff I can't speak toward, but I guarantee you the number one goal of foreign influence is the control of information. Of course, that includes social media, entertainment, and the press.
Mm-hmm.
But number two under that, like the press, I think is the most important. Do I think that major outlets kill stories at the behest of powerful people? I don't need to think it. I've been at the center of it, watching it happen, and I've watched it happen to other reporters. I've given a lot of information that I'll be now reporting.
And then you have the other side of that where even if you can't kill a story, you have what's like flooding the zone with crap to like obfuscate so much information that people just don't even know what to believe anymore. And I feel like we've seen more and more of that, especially in the age of social media and, how quickly things can get shared and how many junk news sites pop up. It just has become extremely easy to get people to become desensitized and to stop caring and even just question their own reality.
And
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
no, I'm sorry.
I was gonna
go ahead.
Sorry.
This is the part of the podcast where we all apologize for talking at the same time.
No, please. You guys go.
Yeah,
we want to hear more from you about.
Well, the only thing I wanted to ask was, I guess for listeners that are hearing all these names and they're trying to put it all together, what is like the end game of a figure like Guo or a figure like Tom Barrack? Like can we possibly speculate on that? Or do you have any ideas for where you think they were trying to take things? What's the agenda?
One. Which one do you want?
Well, I was going to say, I think it comes back to a lot of what Rocco was saying about the control of information. And I think Guo is like the perfect example of that. This for Barrack.
He's got a yacht
where
he's floating around in international waters sometimes running media operations. But sorry, I'm just saying it's a great place to
That's what we want, right?
That's your James Bond villain right there.
Right.
Yeah, we're gonna get Guo's yacht. You better believe it.
We're gonna ride our jet skis up to it or parachute onto it.
But
I think it really comes down to a lot of what Rocco was saying was control of information and being able to continue being a shadowy figure. Like a lot of these people try to stay out of the public eye because they just don't want to be scrutinized. They don't want what?
That's the miraculous thing about Guo, though. He makes music videos.
Okay, but
and blackmails.
I wasn't talking about him. I was talking more about Barrack. Why people haven't heard about people like Barrack and Brody. No, I said aside from Guo though, like this is no, it's all good. But Guo is like the perfect example of flooding the zone with crap, and then people like Barrack, Brody, all of these other shadowy figures that people don't really hear or care about. I think Brody did get in the news because of the
Playgirl.
Yeah.
Maybe need to have an abortion, I guess.
Right. But I think
former Coup finance chair of the RNC.
For Endgame, it does, I think, come down to the control of information. That's when we talk about influence, that's also how you control influence, how you can like show how much influence you can have. You
can trade information
and money. It also comes down to money. And then when you have enough money, then it's about power, right? And from there, it's, how do you keep power? How do you grow your dynasty or your empire or your corporate empire or whatever?
Yeah.
Or leverage that.
What drives these people? Like there's a phenomenon called duper's delight, where people who are like described like a low-level sort of scam person who you get off on the duping of people. And I think there's an intrinsic sort of very American sentiment that everybody lies, at least has been embraced in recent times. And everybody does this. And it's like, we're not even trying to look at it from a moral standpoint. I'm like, well, but there's empirical data, more of it than ever out there. So that just means you guys are making money off suppressing it. And what if we Netflixed the Palantirs of the world? What if we started letting, soccer moms and wrestling dads from Indiana go and
do their own research,
but
in a way,
and charge them,
in a way that is not just Googling something and then seeing a junk news blog or a Steve Bannon podcast or, whatever. Like
that's what we want to have.
The whole do your own research thing is like the perfect example of like duping people into thinking they're doing their own research when really
research is not reporting. We want to make a big distinction, and you don't get shield laws and you do not get protection as a journalist if you're a researcher.
Right.
Yeah. And it's not to disparage research. There's places for all these people, but I mean, I couldn't hire a researcher that was good 10 years ago. If you paid me a bunch of money, no one wanted to be on. Now everybody's a researcher. but
try at least.
I'm just saying it's all these pieces fit together. The negative of what's missing from the press and the media is where these people have the most influence and control.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to see things like, the main financier of Rumble gave $1 million to the PIC, and that's a whole different tranche, as we call them, of stories. What we have is like a bountiful thing that just keeps growing. And eventually we want to create a platform. We are creating a platform. You can imagine sliding drawers of specimens, or like, the metal cabinets where you would keep paintbrushes or something as an artist. We want to create that for foreign influence and corruption and criminal enterprise.
Because we
like looking at it. I mean, that's
and
not because we're like, we're going to bust you.
I will say one of the greatest things to happen in, when I was younger in my career was the whole learn to code harassment campaign.
Too bad we did.
Yeah. Because a lot of the stuff that we found, like, it's stuff that you kind of really need to figure out where to look. And it's not hacking or anything like that. It's just building the right tools to scrape the right places.
Comparing who is data to corporate registries, which is as old as the muckraking gets in terms of the corporate registries. But then you have offshore companies. You have to understand how crypto works. You have to look at all these connections that there's no reason the technology is there and not prohibitive for me to type in one address and get who has information, all of the corporate registry information worldwide, which means that some of this stuff is left unfixed on purpose, at least from my point of view.
I just wanted to add one more thing, because I know my co-host Joseph Flatley had something to say, but it sounds like at the end of the day, whether we're talking about GWO or whether we're talking about corporate intelligence, which, it's funny, we always hear about the CIA or this intelligence group, but more people need to talk about literal corporate intelligence firms. I mean, these are privately owned, and I think what's at work with all of this is that whoever is the highest bidder is getting their interests served. You have different interest groups essentially using corporate intelligence and different shadowy figures to pursue whatever interests the highest bidder is willing to give them. So that's sort of how I look at it. If you, I don't know if you agree or disagree with that.
Yes, and I'll just add, a lot of the people running these firms, almost all of them, honestly, are former intelligence, contractors, members of the intelligence community. They know how it works.
Oh, yeah.
They have friends inside that have clearances. They do stuff that's shady. I've had people approach me for jobs that aren't real people, and I've caught them. I went to Paris one time and knocked on their door, and I was like, you're an actor.
Yeah.
And they freak out. And I'm like, if you're a spy, you're supposed to be tough. And they don't want to talk about it. And I'm like, well, if these are the people watching guarding our country, and I just think that if they're getting involved with stuff like that after they're out of the intelligence community, and by no means does that mean it's a very small subset, but they're a very powerful subset. Why are they doing this, and why aren't they being held accountable?
But
it sounds extremely like you go from the CIA or Mossad to private intelligence firms.
We can make a lot more money.
You're serving mercenary interests. You're basically a mercenary for capital in a lot of ways.
Yeah, exactly. And that's again, it's about the motivation, whether it's money or influence, whatever.
Right. And listening to your podcast, one whole episode, and I think I'm an expert now because I've heard one episode.
There's only one, so you are.
Yeah. So it feels like you're kind of building up to January 6th. Is there a connection? Are you going to make a kind of explicit connection between this influence peddling at the beginning of the term and then this kind of weird coup attempt or whatever you want to call it at the end of the term? Because Coke, already that sets off alarm bells.
Well, the Coke is endless.
Yeah. It's great. I mean, part of the reason it's kind of a blessing in disguise that the original format we wanted to do this, got ripped out from under us. We got to go in and really get into some of the nitty gritty of like, where are they now kind of idea of like, we talk about the roles a lot of the people we have on the audio played during, the inauguration, like how some of that influence played out throughout the administration. And then, where are they now? Like, are they being included in some of these lawsuits over January 6th or the big lie, or however you want to, a lot of it is going to bleed into what's going on and it's going to be playing out in real time. So we are taking our time in the sense of, we have to record pickups almost every week. Like, we have the foundation for our podcast ready, and then we have to go and redo parts because there's a new docket entry or there's a new, like a big new update that is pretty important that we have to include. So, we want to record and release regularly, but with the speed that some of these things are moving, sometimes it's better for us to like wait another day even to get the most updated information in. But yes, you're absolutely right. A lot of the figures do tie into what ended up happening on the 6th. And, we have a wealth of information on that as well. And
for instance, Boris Epstein he's a figure that has been in the background of the Trump administration since and is referenced on the tapes.
Pretty funny ways.
Pretty funny and disparaging, I would say, ways.
Yeah.
About him meddling. This is all I'll say for now. That's a figure that's being looked at closely by the January 6th committee, who saw, and not many people, at all that weren't Trump's immediate family, saw the administration the whole way through.
Right.
So that's significant. We're not exactly sure how. I'm hesitant to say, well, there's certainly a connection with corporate intelligence and private firms in January 6th and how that came about in the Dominion voting side, which is something I think they got into in the last hearing. And the rumors that built this stop the steal sort of anger that popped the Capitol and the narrative that built that. And I think there's very similar, it's all about the systems. And it's almost like, what we're trying to do is break these things down, not only for the audience, but for ourselves, because these are very mysterious and weird practices. Like there's no guidebook to this stuff. And particularly with these corporate intelligence firms, they're based off of intelligence community sort of standards and practices, but of course they get the big bucks because they can deviate from them.
Right.
So Rocco, if you could back up for a second, you mentioned Boris Epstein, and I believe he was involved directly with the Trump administration, but also very much involved with Sinclair Broadcasting Group, which is essentially like the new version of Fox News. They've become a new sort of big right-wing echo chamber. So can you talk a little bit more about how he figures into the January 6th event?
Well, I think a lot of that remains to be seen, given that I'm not sure if he's actually submitted to testimony or to subpoena from them. I don't think he has. I think now that they're starting to lock people up with referrals, and I might be wrong about that. I have not checked.
I was just trying to see if there was any new information about this.
And I can't speak. I can speak less to that and more to, if he participated in the sort of competing press narratives that seem to have been going on during the inaugural committee. In other words, there's one example I'll mention that I know about. It's not on the tapes, but I know about from another source, where he issued a press release that it didn't feature any of the people of color that were listed as performers or artists at the event. And apparently the implication was that he had done that on purpose. And the actual side of the press team that was supposed to be in charge of it was furious at him because it screwed up their relationship with the guest. Is that something that somebody that was ultimately in charge told him to do? Or did he take it upon himself to do that? If he was pulling weird stuff like that, and that's a mild description of what I think he was doing. I don't want to be disparaging or defamatory, so I'm just trying to stick to what I heard and what my interpretation was. If he was doing stuff like that in terms of information control with the 6th, you can imagine how batshit crazy that might have gone in terms of how things are being issued. These guys do stuff like, well, in trap reporters at major outlets, you'll never hear about it for obvious reasons, at least to me, where they'll either report something incorrectly or not thoroughly, and they never can really go back and re-report that without it being a big problem. So most of the time it doesn't happen. And then they've kind of got a finger around them, and they can say, well, hey, you fucked that up, but I got new stuff for you. And you see how this vicious cycle works. This is what's happening into backing people into narratives. They're preconceived narratives. Do I think that he's instrumental in that sort of weaving together of narrative and reality? Yeah, I do. I think he's wherever he's doing at Sinclair, wherever he was doing at Sinclair was transposed over to politics quite well, and they dovetail together.
And
I think
Sinclair's
operatives like him all over the place.
I was just going to say Sinclair's important because they have so many local affiliates. You know, they'll do the top of the hour news break or whatever, and it's very much tilted towards a really, really right-wing narrative. So, and that affects things just on a local level. And you know, obviously we have the
county by county of that.
Right. And when we have these sort of narratives like, oh, it was actually Antifa that did this. And, you know, so the last thing I wanted to ask about, Emily, you were at the Capitol, right? On January 6th. Can you talk about that and your research into this whole, I don't even know what this is really. I've heard it before, but the 3%ers.
Oh yeah. The Threepers, which
and I guess
they're
Guy
no longer a
Reffitt
thing.
is a character. Yeah.
Yes. So Guy Reffitt was a Texas 3%. He was part of a Texas 3%er chapter. The 3%ers, they didn't like to be called the militia group, but at the end of the day, that's what they were. And they dissolved after the 6th because there were so many Threepers who were, you know, part of those groups that were storming the Capitol. They dissolved afterwards, said it was because of, you know, how they were portrayed because of the 6th. So Guy Reffitt was the first defendant to go to trial over January 6th. And I filmed him pretty much on the steps of the Northwest lawn, or I was standing on the Northwest lawn of the Capitol filming at the stairs that led up to the Capitol. And that was, I believe, the first, the footage of Dominic Pizzola like smashing the window. That was that side of the Capitol. So I was filming him, and, you know, it's one of those things where I'm standing so far away, but I've got this pretty powerful camera like trained on him because I see this group of people who are pretty aggressively confronting police. The Capitol Police were using crowd control devices like mace and pepper balls and shooting at these individuals at the front who were being pretty confrontational. And I see Reffitt sort of, you know, getting maced and, you know, taking a second to recover. And then he starts like waving on the people behind him. And as he's doing that wave, his jacket comes up and reveals a holster that was on his hip. And I was filming in 4K. And in the moment, of course, I didn't see it because it's really just this tiny, tiny thing. And my eye can barely pick that up. But in the footage, like, you can really zoom in and look at it. And if you fix the contrast levels too, you can see even better what that is. And you can see the silver part of the firearm sticking out of the holster. So he maintained the entire time that he was not armed, and he didn't think there was enough evidence. In my opinion, he was really trying to play to the plausible deniability of that. Yeah. And his lawyer even tried to say, well, maybe the footage was deep faked or whatever, which I think he was using the wrong term there, because deep faking is when you superimpose a different face. Get into
some deep fakes.
Maybe if Amber Heard was in it or something, it would have been deep fake.
So he was essentially trying to say that I had altered the footage in some way, which I absolutely did not. And, you know, somebody had pointed out that that Reffitt was there. I went through my footage. I put up the screenshot and the clip, or I think just a screenshot. And, you know, within very quickly, it made it into his court filings. So I was approached by an AUSA, a prosecutor, and it basically asked to sign a certificate of authenticity, which is, you know, common when your footage or work product is being used in proceedings. And of course I did. And they used that, they enhanced it to show better, like show what was in it. So I think they either upped the brightness so you can see better. And, you know, until they had that raw footage, they had been using, I think, a screen grab from, I did upload my footage in 4K to YouTube, but I think it still compresses and has some quality issues. So when I gave them the raw footage, there's pretty much no doubt at that point. So Refit really tried to play the plausible deniability to the very end there, and the jury ended up finding him guilty on all the counts, including the being armed. And he did admit it to his own family. And, you know, his son, Jackson Refit, who's 18, testified against him as well. And, you know, he kind of was in the news for turning his father in the first place. So, but back to that day, it was kind of, you know, I had gone to one of the, Rocco and I had both gone to the first Million MAGA March in November. And, you know, it was, in my perspective, like I remembered back to the 2016 election, and I kind of just assumed, you know, this was something that, yeah, they're going to really fight it to the very end and try to keep Trump, you know, keep saying like, oh, you know, Trump's going to win, or Trump won, or whatever. But I figured it would taper off over time. And January 6th was kind of like, I went there, and I always bring my riot gear just because you know, you got to be prepared for it. But I just never really thought, considering like there was already enough out there about people wanting to, you know, whether it was drag lawmakers out or, you know, rush the Capitol, whatever, stop the certification, stop the steal. So
resurrect John F. Kennedy Jr.
Yeah, that too. Very important.
No, he's still alive. He doesn't need to be resurrected.
Yeah, come on. They just want to find him, want to see him again.
I'm sorry.
Anyway, so I wasn't expecting a full-on breach. I was expecting some kind of confrontation. And so when I saw Refit and I saw him sort of egging on the crowd behind him, he wasn't the only. There were a lot of people who were really just inciting as much as they could to get the people to rush the police lines. And some people I filmed like rushing up with these shields and trying to break through and just really being aggressive. But when they broke through those police lines, well, first off, I was extremely just shocked by the lack of police presence. And that's coming from, like, I've been covering civil unrest since I was 19 years old. Like, I've seen almost everywhere else I've covered civil unrest or riots, almost too many police most of the time. Like, it's insane amounts of police, federal, local, whatever. So I was shocked at the low police presence, because there was no way they didn't know something like this was going to happen. I mean, even like considering the Black Lives Matter protests in DC, or even the Kavanaugh protests in DC, there were so many more cops there comparatively. And so, you know, there were even times that day where I filmed while the Capitol was still surrounded. I filmed DHS police officers walking away, and I couldn't tell if it was just they had like given up, or, you know, they just didn't care. Who knows? Like walking away and then look at each other and kind of shrug, you know? And so there was something extremely just off about the whole day. And, you know, I'm not going to lie, like, I've seen some pretty crazy stuff happen in other countries, but the fact that this was at home, like, really took me aback. And, you know, to this day, I'm still very, very curious if we're going to figure out the full story about what happened, you know, why the National Guard was delayed, why there weren't enough.
I was going to say, not to interrupt you, but I think there's even like a discrepancy in timelines about the events between the National Guard and their timeline of it and the Pentagon's timeline. I mean, it gets really creepy, these issues that come up.
It's very creepy. And, you know, I think rightfully so, a lot of people have a lot of doubt about whether or not there's going to be, you know, whether it's the committee or the authorities, the Capitol Police, federal police, whatever, whether there is going to be a full accounting of what happened.
But now you're seeing stuff like this Loudermilk video that contradicts what the Capitol Police, I believe, were saying about the party that he had brought in to essentially surveil the Capitol and the tunnels and the stairs. Because I think yesterday the police said that, you know, nobody was there doing what this guy does in the video they released this morning, which is
Right.
clearly taking photos of the tunnels and stairs while Alan that's in the background being like, look at that, that's George Washington and that's
Right.
whatever he's saying.
So as somebody who was there and was just totally felt put off by how everything went down, I really do want to get to the bottom of it. And, you know, we're working on our own projects regarding the 6th. Right now, I only have a blog post up on the nose. Just I wanted to get
Very good
something
one
out.
too.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. Kind of rushed it, but it just, you know, it's kind of almost a play-by-play of, you know, certain incidents. And, you know, I do really look forward to putting out more about just the whole, everything surrounding it.
Peel the orange.
Or the onion, you know, depending on how much it stinks. But
Or the banana. Oh,
the banana, and then yeah.
well,
The thing I would just say about the 6th, and I don't want to sound like a really conspiratorial nutter
No, I get it.
here, but you know,
I do.
I don't think people realize we came very close to. I think you could have enacted continuity of government measures, national emergency measures that, you know, could have been very dangerous. And it, you know, it makes you wonder if there was, you know, a potential coup d'etat going on.
It really does
attempted
make you
coup
wonder.
d'etat. Yeah.
And that's why, you know, I think people should want to get to the bottom of it, wherever it comes from. So,
Well, and you asked earlier about Jan 6 connections. That's where Guo knows
yeah.
a lot.
And that was
Mhm.
actually, you know, I don't want to get too much into it, but one of the reasons I went there was to continue filming. Well, actually, the reason that I went there was it was going to be part of our Guo Knows series.
Mhm.
And just kind of visualizing like real life effects of amplification networks. And it was interesting because there was a significant lack of presence by Guo followers. There were plenty of Chinese American groups there and Chinese dissident groups, but they were wearing different things that weren't related to the group that Guo was a part of. So I will be getting more into that in future reporting, but that was originally why I went there. And, you know, I never really expected it to unfold the way that it did. And, you know, at the end of the day, again, like people who are criticizing January 6th committee have every right to do so if it's in the spirit of still trying to get to the bottom of it, not necessarily like,
Sure.
you know, like, I don't know. I just think there needs to be more also independent reviews, like independent investigations, and everybody should want to know what happened. And nobody should be like, you know, I keep hearing the thing about like, oh, well, it was all Antifa or whatever like that. No, again, like I've covered enough of these events to be able to see the difference. And I think we've seen enough in the court filings of different defendants to see like some of the rioters were trying to disguise themselves as Antifa or you know, and if you look at what Proud Boys were doing that day, like they didn't want to necessarily wear their colors like they did in the Million MAGA March, but still coordinated in the sense of the orange armbands or
Antifa was used throughout really the Trump presidency as a
scare tactic,
MacGuffin, if you will, for the right, where a MacGuffin is in you know, George Lucas movies or Raiders of the Lost Ark, the thing that all the characters are chasing, but there's not really a reason they're chasing it, right? And they used Antifa as this, you know, they started all the arson.
It's another bone in the other direction,
right?
Yeah, and
it's a narrative.
And
it's a narrative.
You know, the way that they did that was really effective in also creating more hostility towards journalists. I can't tell you how many times since the 6th I've been accused of being Antifa, and it's hilarious if you actually like know my background. But like, I've covered a lot of events in different places, and including ones with Antifa, and like I know there's very like significantly like distinct tactics, and like if I did see Antifa there like breaking into the buildings and stuff, and I knew it was that, then I would absolutely report on that too. But it's just amazing how this narrative has been used to create hostility towards the press. You know, there was even I write about it in the blog post. There was a journalist who was attacked very violently and dragged away because, you know, people thought, well, first they were saying, get the media out of here. And then
Mhm.
other people thought he was Antifa and started wailing on him essentially. And, that does happen. That happened to me in the field once, well, more than once, I should
Mhm.
say. And it stinks because like, it's very, very effective. The narrative that these people are using to create the fear around Antifa in order to like, keep press out or,
I
just
just want
create
to say,
hostile battles. Yeah.
I just want to say two things in closing. First, with what you said about Antifa, I think that's an important point because, all I hear about, on social media, you get these crazy people that are like, Antifa, they attacked this Andy No guy, but you never hear about journalists that get attacked by the right. I don't think we hear about it enough. For some reason, we hear about this goofball Andy No. And, the other thing I wanted to say was, I don't get this narrative that, if you support looking into January 6th, you're Liz Cheney. You're on Liz Cheney's side. I don't like Liz Cheney that much. I'm afraid of anyone with the name Cheney next to their name. But that doesn't mean that, we shouldn't investigate January 6th. It's just bizarre, the sort of, it's like a funhouse mirrors world that we're in right now. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
Well, I think I want to leave, last thing I want to say, I'm going to leave you with a quote from The Brass Check, which if you have never read The Brass Check, it's by Upton Sinclair.
Amazing book.
Yeah, you might have read The Jungle, which is about the meat industry and
created
result of the USDA meat. When you see that stamped on there, before The Jungle, butchers and meat places, you go in and you have rotten meat, people get sick.
Rat feces.
Yes, and the book was so visceral, the government stepped in and created the USDA, which I think everyone can agree.
Oh, yeah. I would like the government to interfere with the quality of my meat.
Yes. So, the Brass Check, a study of American journalism, evidence and reasons behind the media's corruption. And this is a later book that he wrote after essentially being excommunicated for being right all the time and rubbing it in
people's faces.
But in his report, and this is just a quote I found very fitting for this discussion we just had. It says, "We in America speak of steel kings and coal barons, of lords of wheat and lumber, and oil and railroads, and think perhaps that we are using metaphors. But the simple fact is that the men to whom we refer occupy in the world of industry precisely the same position and fill precisely the same roles as were filled in the political world by King Louis, who said, 'I am the state.'" And I think that applies to pretty much everything we just talked about.
And so does what he talks about when he talks about prostitute journalism, which is, part of the reason we made a blog section on the nose called Simulacrums is to talk about how news sausage is made. And I think a lot of people will find it pretty interesting and a little more, like, I know the first one's kind of dark, but like will be a lot more light, I think, in some of these, maybe not all of them, but kind of getting back to the spirit.
There'll be some funny stuff.
Yeah, getting back to the spirit of Upton Sinclair.
What is a brass check?
Brass check is essentially what sex workers back in the day would be given. It's sort of like what do you want to call it? Like credit.
You would go to a brothel,
yeah,
and instead of exchanging the money,
you
go to the front of the house and get a brass check.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he compares it to how the media industry works, and it's a really, really amazing book. Highly recommend it.
It was first published in 1919, so ain't a new problem.
Yeah, and now we know why you kept looking at a book. I thought you were getting bored, so.
I'm sorry.
He's trying to find his place.
I was trying to find my place because I had to mangle that quote a little bit to make it work.
Right.
Right.
I was just also nervous in looking at the book.
Well, nothing to be nervous about here. I mean,
this is our first.
We do have 17 viewers.
Woo, all right. Well, I want to give a quick shout out to our other colleague, Rob Waldeck, who we just published one of his pieces yesterday. That's the first installment about sort of the background of Tom Barrack. And, this one's more about, his connections to Paul Manafort and how he got him involved with the administration. And going forward, we're going to be talking a lot more about Barrack and his UAE connections and Saudi Arabia connections too. So I highly recommend people all of our 17 viewers, go read Rob's piece if you haven't already, and keep an eye out for more, because I promise you the foreign influence stuff is a lot more interesting than it sounds.
Yeah. And so the Knows, knows.net, and the podcast is called 7 Days in January.
Yes.
And when's the next episode come out?
So we are releasing a narrated article as a bonus episode tomorrow. It's Rob Waldeck's piece. So if you don't like reading, you can just listen to it. And then we were thinking probably by the end of this week, we would put out we'll say Monday. We want to keep it consistent.
Let's say Monday. There's some very important things we need to look into that came up regarding how a very long list of people were credentialed to allowed to be around the president. Mm-hmm. And the paperwork regarding those credentials seems to be a bit wobbly.
Yeah. So we're going to say Monday for the chapter 1 is what we're calling it. It's the second episode, but chapter 1, which is called Chairman of the Ball. And it's all about Tom Merrick.
Yeah. Forgive us for our, we would much rather be putting out stuff that you might want to spend an hour of your time with a week. Eventually we'll be up and rolling with at least a couple pieces of content a day, but it really is just three of us.
And Rob has a job.
A lot of people helping,
yeah.
But until we can we can pay everyone properly, which
we're starting to make some leeway there.
But top 100 on Apple Podcasts, which was very surprising.
We did, and last thing, as far as talking about our own brass check, we would appreciate if anybody goes to our support page. We have a donation link as well as a Bitcoin wallet up there. And seriously, every little bit helps, because
do you real good.
You know it.
Yeah, we need people donating to the Knows, because we have too many fake independent journalists running around. People like Tim Pool who say, "Oh, I'm independent. I'm not part of the team A or
no
team
journalist."
B." Screw them. We need the Knows.
And yeah, we did get Tim Pool to admit on his own live stream that he doesn't do news. He's just a guy who complains about his feelings online. So
that's how you lose your shield law.
Real journalism, the Knows, Emily and Rocco.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.